Good afternoon and welcome to the December edition of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin. And today I'm joined by Lauren Preedy from Walker Family Law. The Divorce Support Club is an offering from Walker Family Law as an additional service on top of their legal services. It's a safe, informal place for you to ask questions and to gather a toolkit to help you manage your emotions, get clarity around the things perhaps that are worrying you or scaring you as you go through your separation and divorce, so that you can feel stronger and more confident. So we will discuss strategies to help you take back your power, challenge perhaps negative thinking, and focus on taking steps forward. So as I said, my name is Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I've been divorced twice. I'm a single mum to two boys, one of who's in his 20s now. I'm also the author of a book behind me, Breakup from Crisis to Confidence. And my role is to support you through the emotional ups and downs of separation with confidence and dignity. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. I'm Lauren Preedy and I'm a partner and solicitor at Walker Family Law and one of the founders of the Divorce Support Club. I've been a solicitor qualified since 2006, I think, and deal with divorce, separation for that's with people that are married or unmarried, and children matters. I've also been divorced before, and I'm remarried, and I've got two stepchildren, one who's 11 and in her first year at secondary school, and a little boy who's 8.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Lauren. And before we get into the content, just want to say that we have the chat box and the Q&A down the bottom of the screen. If you're watching, you can ask questions as we go along. We will try and answer everything before the end of this episode. So today we're going to talk about Christmas. Christmas can be a really challenging time when you are separated or going through a divorce or post-divorce as well. The media portrays Christmas as this like brilliant time with when all families are together and there's lots of twinkling lights and so on. And maybe Christmas has been very much like that for you in the past. Perhaps it's always been a big thing, and you're worried how your separation or your divorce will affect Christmas, particularly for your children. Um, Emotions, of course, are very heightened around Christmas. Perhaps you're worried about maybe the time the children are going to be away, or maybe you're worried that your ex might try to buy their affection with bigger, better, more expensive presents. Or maybe you and your ex just can't agree about arrangements about how you divide the time. Or maybe all of that is fine and you just want some tips about how to enjoy the time when you're by yourself, perhaps over Christmas. All of those things can mean that you feel perhaps stressed, a bit overwhelmed, perhaps on edge, and that will permeate to down to your children. So the best way that you can make sure your children have a happy Christmas is to make sure that you are okay over Christmas, because how you approach it, whether it's your own feelings or the arrangements or the transition, perhaps it will impact the children and their memories and their outlook and how they see it. So we thought we would talk today about some of the common problems and issues that people come to us with relating to arrangements, first of all, around Christmas. So, Lauren, what kind of questions do people often ask you?
Well, there's two scenarios that come to mind. The first one is if people have already got either informal arrangements in place by way of a parenting plan, which I can talk more about later on, but also if there is a court order in place. Now, although court orders, the whole point of them is to assist people and to specify when children will go and see each parent. But sometimes when they're drawn up, depending on how long ago it was, things may have changed since then. And what can then happen in that scenario is that people want to make changes to what's in there because they haven't accounted for the children perhaps being a little bit older or haven't accounted for people moving house. So questions that people most commonly ask in those circumstances are can they change something in the court order? Now, usually the answer to that will be no, because the court order is what has been given as an order by the court, and both parties are bound into that. But often, especially if you're you can have any kind of communication with the other person, or if they've had a solicitor, then you don't need to necessarily go back to court, but you could deal in correspondence with making changes to that court order. But it's always worth taking advice if you do have a court order in place, or even if there's an interim court order in place, because we'll do everything we can to try and resolve matters with as less conflict as possible. Now, questions that people ask if they're in the process of separating, or perhaps they've already separated, but there isn't any official arrangements in respect of the children, or if actually things have changed with other family arrangements, is how should you divide the time? And there isn't a right or a wrong answer to that. Um, Often it can depend upon location. So if parents live close to each other, then the children can move more freely between them potentially.
Mm.
Um, but if there's a distance between the parents, or if, of course, people are visiting family over the festive period, a bit more careful consideration needs to be given to the age of the children, the impact it will have on them moving back and forth, having stability over the Christmas period. And common ways for people to divide the time, and I'm sure that you see this a lot as well, Claire, is sometimes people do a base it around the school holidays. So they may say, well, actually, there's 2 weeks of the school holidays, let's take a week each. And sometimes people agree that one year, one person will have Christmas Eve, Christmas, and Boxing Day, and the other one has the next year. And sometimes people divide those days equally, or sometimes they divide them half a day on Christmas Eve, and then that person that has Christmas Eve picks up the other person has them on Christmas Day. So I
Mm.
think to keep an open mind about it, I would say, and um, if there's any degree of conflict likely to occur, then again, and we've talked about this a lot of times in the context of lots of things, it's to try and prepare it in advance
Mm.
rather than there be an argument on Boxing Day about the pickup time and who's driving where, particularly if someone is having a glass of wine with lunch and then can't drive. So being fully prepared for these things is absolutely the most important thing, I would say.
I totally agree. I know from working with clients that this is something that people start to worry about, in kind of August, September sometimes. And actually, the earlier you can start to open these conversations up, and the more you can frame those conversations around what's going to work for the children, the better. If you can agree, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you can agree on how you want the children to feel and they kind of how you want to approach this early on, then that will really help in when you come to
Mm.
actually sit down and talk about it or email about it or communicate about it in whatever way you're going to.
Mm. And
Um,
sometimes there's traditions, of course. So it might
mm,
be that the children have always gone to the grandparents on Christmas Eve, and they might
yes,
want to carry on doing that. But then, of course, their parents aren't going to be together there because of the separation. But actually, it's then taking into account the children's wishes and feelings, but that can depend upon the age of them. So when the court, using the expression of the court, when they're looking at the contact arrangements, depends on the ages of the children as to how mature and how able they are to make decisions like that. But even with young children, I think that from a sensible approach is that if they've always really, really enjoyed doing something, then you'd hope that both parents would take that view that actually they can carry on doing that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I was talking about this with a client just yesterday, and she was talking about the Christmas arrangements, and they've always gone to certain family members on Boxing Day. And in their case, they're agreed that that needs to carry on because it's one of the things in the children's lives around over Christmas that's going to stay constant and that's now certain. And as human beings, we really like certainty. We like to know where we are. The other arrangement that I have also seen, other than the ones you talked about, is sometimes, depending on the relationship, of course, people spend time together on Christmas Day.
yes, of
Certainly,
course.
certainly a friend of mine used to go to her ex-husband's on Christmas Day just for lunch. And then on years when she had the children, he would go to hers for Christmas lunch. That continued until the children were, I don't know, 13, 14, and they had moved on and met new partners. So that you can be very flexible around this. Um, One of the other things I think that's important to factor into it as well, and this came from my own children one year, was they felt that we had had family Christmas on kind of the 18th, 19th, 20th December with my mum and dad and my brother and so on. Then they'd gone straight to their dads and they'd gone straight into Christmas with that side of the family. And then they'd come back to me and we'd gone to a party. And then they'd gone back to him for a bit. And then we'd gone and they were exhausted. And they said to me, "Can we stop? We just need a couple of days at home doing nothing."
Mm,
It's very tempting to fill up all the time that you've got with the children, but actually that can backfire in them just being completely exhausted. So it's worth factoring that in as well. What does
mm.
the
And of course, as they get
process
older,
feel
well,
like to them?
I was gonna say not just as they get older, but if they want to spend times with their friends, or if they're playing out on their skateboards in the street, or what have you, or playing Minecraft, then
Yeah,
some chill out time, they may choose to want to do that.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you get older, they start having their own social lives and they start to want to do their own thing on New Year's Eve, for example, and maybe even Christmas Eve. So, those things always mean that you have to keep reassessing, almost on an annual basis.
And the other thing as well that I think's worth talking about is where Father Christmas goes. And of
Mm.
course that can also apply to the Tooth Fairy and the Easter
The
Bunny and
Easter Bunny.
anything. Yeah, yeah. As to whether Father Christmas goes to both houses, does Father Christmas go to the house they wake up in? I think it's just important so that, especially of course with young children, they nobody puts their foot in it, I suppose is the
Mm.
best way of putting that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so that leads me really on to thinking about how do you reach agreement? Because all of those things are things which it's if you can reach agreement on those things, that's going to be much better for everybody. So I suppose questions to ask yourself, I was thinking about this beforehand. Before you speak to your ex-partner about Christmas or indeed about any holidays, really, think to yourself about where you want to get to. So the kind of questions that I'd be asking clients in sessions would be things like, in 5 or 10 years' time, how do you want the children to feel when they look back? And with that goal in mind, how do you want to show up in these conversations right now?
Mm,
Um, and also be very mindful of your motivation. So I was talking to a client recently who, although the proposal that her ex-partner had put to her worked and was fine with her in terms of the schedule that he'd proposed, she just didn't want to make it easy for him. So deep down, she just wanted to be difficult because she didn't want him to have an easy ride over the negotiations. So we talked through the motivation. So it's really worth digging quite deep and thinking, what is my motivation here? Is this about me and how I'm feeling, and any sort of residual bitterness or upset or hurt? Or is this actually about what's best for the children? And those can be really challenging questions. I absolutely acknowledge that. But they're really
yeah.
worth asking because they can help you to rethink how you communicate with your partner.
And sometimes, of course, it can feel really hurtful to one person if the other person has a new partner and if
Yes.
they have other family arrangements as well. So you could end up with kind of three sets of grandparents thrown into the mix, and it can be really difficult to navigate that. So
Mhm.
it's I can understand from both parties' perspective the difficulties that that can come
Yeah,
with.
absolutely. There's also something around assumptions. So not only look at your own motivations, but look at the assumptions you might be making about the other person's motivations. That's also worth looking at. Well, what assumptions are you making? So my client was assuming that her ex-partner was perhaps trying to be a bit sneaky or get something past her without her noticing, or um, the intention was perhaps to punish. Actually, when we dug into that and I asked you, is that 100% true? Are you 100% sure? You can't be sure. And actually, what would it be more helpful to you and the children to assume? Perhaps they're trying to be open, perhaps they're trying to communicate. They might be doing it badly, they might be phrasing it not very well. But actually, if you make an assumption that they're trying to communicate with you, it can make the communication between you much easier.
And sometimes another difficult thing that often comes up and linked to money in a way as well is that if you've got children, young children as well, but particularly I suppose that can't pick presents for the other parent, and you're then having to buy a present for them, and you think, well, they might get me a rubbish present, what shall I get them? But then the joy that the children get in giving the gift, that can be also a difficult emotion to navigate as
Yeah,
well.
yes. And I mean, I remember this through my own divorce, and I think it's really helpful to sort of stand very firm in your own integrity on this, regardless of what your ex-partner may or may not do. Stand very firm in your own integrity, your own values. You know, what
Mm.
would, if I was being the best person I can be right now, what would I do? It's a really good question to ask. Um, so as I was saying, if you can communicate where you want to get to, communicate how you want to frame the discussion. So, for example, you might be able to agree we both want the children to have really good memories of Christmas. We want the children perhaps not to worry about pleasing either of us. We want the children to remember the experiences they had and to remember Christmas as a happy time, not a stressful one where there was lots of arguing. And if you can agree on those things with your ex-partner, that's brilliant because you can bring each other back to those goals when things perhaps maybe go a little bit off track. Some of the other things we were going to talk about as well was what if people don't want the children to spend time with their ex-partner over Christmas? I'm sure this probably comes up in conversations you have.
Yes, it does, and um, it comes up a lot when um there is, of course, high emotions,
Mm.
which there are in a lot of cases, and sometimes it happens with my own clients that say to me that they don't want the other parent to see the children, and that's where with just a bit of discussion and as you said, kind of investigating why. And that's why it's also so good to work with you, Claire, because of course that's the role that you play in helping people navigate these difficult situations. And obviously I'm there to be um, as helpful and sympathetic, but also to make sure that my clients understand the law. And sometimes I might need to give a little bit of tough love about it and say, well, actually, the attitude that my own client's taking, they need to rethink about it because they're being unfair. And if a judge it sounds very dramatic, but if a judge was looking at it, the judge would be saying that they're wrong. So I have to talk to my clients about why that is and how a court would look at it because the very dramatic result of it could be is that if one parent's preventing contact, an application to the court could be made. So um, I've been dealing with cases like this for an awfully long time, and um, I think that I'm good at explaining that to people, good at helping them negotiate those feelings, and good at helping people come to terms with it. And with
Mm.
with your assistance as well, Claire. I think that we are strong at helping people get through these difficult times.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about a couple of techniques that I use with people on a regular basis around this. And one is thinking about putting yourself in the children's shoes. So I will ask my client to stand in their own shoes. I'll ask them to stand over in that corner of the room and tell me how the situation looks to them. How do they feel? And what do they want? What do they believe? And then I'll ask them to shake that off and I'll get them to stand in a different corner of the room. And I'll ask them to think about it from their ex's perspective. And this can be really hard. So I'll ask people to really stand in their ex-partner's shoes with their beliefs, with their outlook on the world. And I'll ask them, what does it look like to you? What do you believe? What would you like to happen? And what do you see and how do you feel? Then I'll ask them to shake it off, and then I'll get them to stand in the children's shoes in a different spot in the room and look at the situation through the eyes of the children with their upbringing, their wishes, their hopes, etc., etc. And it can be really interesting what comes out because most children just want to be able to enjoy time with both their parents without
Mm,
worrying about upsetting one or the other and without having to worry about the one that they're not with at the time.
mm,
So that can be a really a helpful exercise to do. Um, and it's also really important, I think, to separate the roles of your ex-partner as your ex-partner and your ex-partner as your fellow parent, because they might well really annoy you or really upset you or really get on your nerves as your ex-partner, but actually as your fellow parent, it's a different relationship, and those two things need to be split
Mm.
and divided. So you might have a different goal of where you want to get to with each of those,
Yeah. The
and
other
keeping
thing,
those in front of your mind.
the other thing that also comes up about contact time is if one parent says, well, they've asked for them for those 2 days, but in the afternoon they're going out with their friends to watch a football match, just as an example,
Mm,
and the children are going to be left with the grandparents. And they say, well, what's the point of that parent having the contact if they're not there? But actually, um, if a court was looking at the situation, they're very supportive of the wider family being involved. And it's perfectly acceptable for that parent during their own time to make a decision like that, that they would have somebody else look after the children. And likewise, it works the other way round. So it's sometimes that can be difficult,
mm,
especially if there's different parenting styles, or
mm,
if you've perhaps, might be a silly example, but you've perhaps the other grandparent um, gives them too many sweets in your opinion.
mm.
Well,
Yes.
that's for the other parent to deal with in their time.
Yeah.
And
This is about control, isn't it? And what you can and
yes,
can't control.
yeah, yeah.
Mm,
So that does come up a lot about not just at Christmas, actually. It comes up a lot at other times, that if somebody has the children on a Sunday afternoon but they're out playing rugby, um, what's the point? Well, actually, you're allowed to make decisions when it's your time.
mm. And that reflects actual the sort of, I was going to say normal, but that's not what I mean. It reflects just families. You
Yes,
know,
yeah,
families do things like that. You know, one parent will go off and do something, and the other parent will do something else,
yeah,
and the children
yeah.
might spend a holiday even with their grandparents and so on.
And actually, that
I
can
guess,
link. Oh,
go
sorry,
on.
Claire. I was going to say it could link in as well to sometimes the feelings of guilt of a parent thinking that they can't go and do something on their own. Whereas if, for instance, you fancied going to a Christmas market in the afternoon with your friends and not taking children, then you're allowed to have that time for yourself. And sometimes the Christmas period can make those feelings
Mm,
of guilt be even more.
yeah. An interesting way to look at this, I think, and I talk about this a lot with clients, is to think about what are you modeling to the children. So in those circumstances, what are you modeling? Are you modeling that as a grown up, it's okay to go and spend time with your friends and to be independent and to do those things? Or are you modeling that actually only the children are important and only the children, when you've got the children with you, you can't spend time with anybody else? And I'm not sure that's a very healthy model to be
No, I
showing
would agree.
children. Mm. The other thing I've said to my own children a lot around different rules in different houses and what you're allowed to do at this grandma's house and but not that grandma's house, or at dad's house and mum's house, is that the rules are different in different places. The rules are different in school to the rules at, say, Scouts or dance club or
Or a
whatever it might
library,
be.
or
Yeah,
yeah,
or your friend's house. So children can cope with different rules in different places. It's always good to be able to agree on the big things, perhaps internet usage and things like that. But on there are things when you need to let it go, and children will cope with there being different rules in different places.
yeah. Talking about age appropriate, or I might just have invented that you just said that. So one thing that also can come up is age appropriate computer games, for instance, and
Mm,
what is suitable for them to be able to watch on the telly. Like if they're 11, can they watch a 15 film? And again, that can cause conflict. And again, it is difficult to navigate. But again, I think you have to be sensible in trusting each other
mm,
that
yeah.
you're going to make those decisions for the best welfare interest of the children. Of course, I know we'll come on to touch about the if things aren't very good from a welfare perspective, but the best interests of the children must come first. And if there are any more serious concerns, that's out of the remit of the conversation today, but you absolutely must raise it. If, for instance, one parent is doing something and it's causing the child to have nightmares, then that needs to be addressed, whether or not one parent's causing it or not causing it. Or
Mm.
if you've got a child which can commonly happen that's still wetting the bed at times, then there might be an emotional link there. But there also could be a physical issue. And if both parents have got parental responsibility, um, then decisions to do with medical issues and things like that need to be shared between them. So I'm sorry, I'm slightly going off on a tangent there, Claire, but it's
No, I
just that
think
overall awareness of the welfare and the paramount concern
yes.
being that of the
And
children.
yeah, and if like we were saying earlier, you can create a relationship between you and your fellow parent that where you can agree on what your desired outcomes are and how you want the children to feel and how you want, how you want them to be and how you want them to remember the times, then that's going to be really helpful when those kind of things come up. When
Mm,
one parent does something that you're not sure you agree with, you can actually then start to open those discussions, framing it in that way. But yeah, we've probably got a whole other seminar about that, I
yes,
imagine.
yeah, yeah.
One of the other things that comes up often when I'm talking with clients is that once you're separated, the children are going to spend some time away from you at Christmas, probably. They're going to spend some time perhaps with their other parent. And what you can do to help yourself through that time, because as I was saying earlier, if you can show the children that you're okay, it's going to be much less stressful for them. So just a few little tips about reframing the time when the children are away. And we've talked about this a lot before. So if people want to go back and find, I think we've done two previous webinars about Christmas, and we've covered this in depth in one of them at least. Just some little tips are focus on the time that you do have together. Have Christmas on a different day and make a plan for having Christmas dinner on a different day when the children are with you, for example. And focus on the time you do have together rather than the time when you're not with them. And ask yourself what you can do in that time that perhaps you couldn't do if they were with you. So I remember talking to a client, and I use this example always, talking to a client about 4 or 5 years ago who I asked her that question. She said, well, actually, I've always wanted to go on the Boxing Day horse ride along the beach with my friend, and I've never been able to do that. So actually, I'm going to go and book myself onto that. So that's what she did, and she went and did this lovely Boxing Day ride through the waves and on the beach and so on, and she really enjoyed it. So think about things that you could do that you would love to do that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if the children were with you. Um, and one other thing is to notice what you're not going to miss. So, for example, maybe you're not going to miss your very grumpy father-in-law, or maybe you're not going to miss having turkey because you really don't like it and you'd much rather eat pizza. Or maybe your ex spent Christmas Day morning picking up all the wrapping paper and moaning about how much mess there was. And actually now you'd like to spread glitter everywhere. So think about what you're not going to miss and what you're going to be able to do differently that perhaps you've always wanted to do.
And on that note though, the other way round as well, you may have to if you've separated and met somebody else,
Mm.
you may have to adjust to other things that come from that. So I laugh because um I used to always have quite minimalistic decorations. And since meeting my now husband, it looks as though the whole of the Christmas shop has exploded over my house.
Your house looks a bit
So
like Total Town.
so so I've had to make adjustments to wanting to tidy things up and not have quite so much out. But it's
Mm.
taken me time, but I've got there. So
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think, that's looking at the traditions that the children are used to, isn't it? Looking at the traditions the children are used to. And depending on how old they are, you could potentially have a conversation with them about which of these traditions are really important to you and you would like to keep, and which maybe would you like to abandon and we can think of something else. So again, talking to a client yesterday, she was saying that she'd had a conversation with her children about which bits of Christmas they really loved and would like to make sure stay the same, and which bits perhaps they aren't so bothered about and they could think of something else to do. So that, they're talking about the transition together and working out which bits of old Christmas they want to keep and what they would like to bring in new.
Mm.
And I think that's a really good conversation to have, I think. Um,
Yeah.
so there are also some people who are going to need to spend some time with their ex over Christmas. Maybe it's just 10 minutes at drop off. Maybe it's they're coming for a coffee on Boxing Day morning, or maybe, whatever it might be. Um, One question I often get asked actually is it a bit weird for us to spend some time all together over Christmas? And I always say you need to do what works best for your family. Whether other people might think it's odd or not doesn't really matter. And I always use the example of, I remember about, when was it? Maybe 2000, 2010. I had a partner at the time, and I was going to be on my own for Christmas because my children were away. So he invited me to his flat for Christmas, and his ex-wife and his children were there as well. Um, and it was fine. In fact, she's become one of my best friends, and I don't see him anymore, but that's by the by. But whatever other people from the outside might think, do what works for you. Do what works for you and your family. Um, there might be it might be that you're a bit worried about that time potentially. So I just thought, a few tips to help you handle the time, especially if you think, if perhaps you don't really enjoy spending that time with your ex, what can you do? So the first thing I'd say is set your intention to start with. How do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Perhaps rehearse in your head how you want to be through the day. Think of some things that you might bring up as sort of safe topics of conversation, perhaps. Um, Again, separate them as your ex-partner and your fellow parent in your head. It can also help to think of just one thing that they do well before they come, so
Yeah.
that you're not just thinking of the negative aspects of them. Think of one thing, just one thing, even if it's tiny weeny, that they do well. Um,
Mm.
and then breath. Breath is your friend. If you feel yourself getting a bit overwhelmed, take some really deep breaths. Perhaps disappear into the bathroom for 10 minutes. Go and do some deep breathing down the end of the garden, whatever it might be. Stop and breathe and just think. And then, of course, when they've gone, you can have a nice reward. Reward yourself for having done it. um,
When I was doing some research the other day when we were preparing for today, I came across these cards which you can get on Amazon. I can't remember what I was reading it on now, but they're called Talking Point. And
mm,
you get a box of cards, and there's some that are designed for children and some that are designed for families. And just as an example, so you're meant to each take it in turns to pull a card. And then, so I've just got some examples here. It says, um, what would you like us to do more as a family? And then
mm,
another one is, how important is money? How do you know when you have enough?
mm,
So depending on how old the children are, these cards are designed to be able to communicate about things, but make
mm,
it almost like it's a game. So you can
mm.
actually you deal with some potentially sensitive topics without it
Yes.
being like a really kind of serious conversation. So
That's a
I
really good idea. It allows you to
mm,
disassociate from the emotions involved. So it's really clever. It's
yeah.
enabling you to take a step back and look at a wider picture.
Yeah. And another one of them was like, what would you do for fun if you had to give up electricity?
Oh,
So they're all, and I kind of, as I was thinking about this in the context of Christmas, I was thinking actually some of these kind of cards and to even if you just sort of thought of some your own questions, like we were saying about, well, if you could keep certain things at Christmas,
mm,
or if you, especially for children, or if money is an issue, if you were able to say to children, okay, so we've got £100 to spend on fun this Christmas. What would you think you'd like to spend it on? And again, to take away that pressure of people think at Christmas time you've got to spend all this money where you don't. And you may just think that they want to walk to the local farm shop and have an ice cream. That
yes. Yeah, you might be surprised by what they come up with.
Yeah,
And the older
yeah,
they get, you can ask them to research this. You can say we've got £100 to
yeah,
spend on this. Go in, have a look on the internet, find out what you'd like to do, tot up how much it would be, perhaps even have a conversation with each other, and then
yeah,
we'll have a
yeah.
we'll
And
have a
about
chat
the
together.
budgeting for Christmas as well. And if the children are at the age where they might have teenagers and have part-time jobs, then of course, what are they going to spend their money on, and what are the obligations that they see of who they should be buying presents for or not, and whose responsibility is that? So, yeah, when I
Mm,
saw those cards, I thought, yeah, I liked that idea
mm.
of
Yeah, really good idea.
mm,
Yeah, like that. Um, Talking of presents, one of the other things I know you mentioned that comes up is around, and I'm really interested to hear what people bring to you around. My ex can afford much better presents than I can, and it's not fair. So does that come up in your conversations as well?
yes, it does, and often it depends on what stage a separation may have reached, as to
Mm,
whether there is divorce proceedings uh, ongoing, or if people are in the process of making financial agreements with each other, or whether that's been finalized or not. And it can be really sensitive if one person has always been the higher earner and the other
mm,
person wasn't, and there may be some kind of interim arrangement of how much money is being provided to run the household if a property hasn't been sold, or if that person's going to stay in the family home. And again, I think it depends on how old the children are and how the communication works with the other parent, um, as to how I advise people on that. So I feel like I'm giving a bit of a rubbish answer to this one. Yes, it can be dealt with within the context of divorce proceedings and maintenance that may be paid.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I guess it can be something that if you're, for example, in mediation, for example, about the children, and Christmas is coming up, it's something that you could talk about in
yeah,
those sessions. I quite often I'm talking to clients who are post-divorce sometimes, and so I think I've looked at this from a couple of angles. The first is if you're the parent who is on the receiving end of this, your ex-partner is spending what you consider to be too much on the children at Christmas or whatever, and frustrating as it is, ultimately there's not a lot you can actually really do about it other than raise your concerns if your relationship is good enough to do so, and hope that they make a choice that you'll like. Um, so if this does happen, I think the big thing is to try and hide your reaction in front of the children at the time. The last thing you
mm.
want is for the child to open this big present and for you to sort of rain on their parade a little bit.
And
Um,
they may not understand
no,
the cost of things, whereas a computer game may cost £50 and it's small, whereas a big monster truck may have cost £20 and it's massive. So
yes.
it depends on the age of children. It's making assumptions of what a child might think that's
Yeah,
actually a
and the
wrong
child might
assumption.
see. Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. And I think, as the children get older, I think hold on to the knowledge that as they get older, children are not daft. They will understand if one parent is trying to buy their
Yeah.
affection, whatever. So hold on to that and try and let go of it, essentially. Now, if you're the parent who has the means to buy those bigger, more expensive presents and so on, again, I think it's worth really checking in with yourself. Why am I buying this massive gift? Is it possible that actually we could buy this massive gift, but I contribute 70% and my ex-partner perhaps contributes
Yeah.
30%? Can we share the cost that way, for example? Um, or alternatively, if you look at your own motivations, really, if you're honest with yourself, are you trying to compensate for something? Are you trying to outdo the other parent? And then ask yourself, is that really the best thing for the children? So
Sometimes the other thing that comes up quite often is children moving things between houses.
yes,
So if one parent has bought them a Nintendo Switch, are they allowed to take that to the other property or not? And
yeah.
if not, why not?
Mm.
Or do they already have one there and do they need two? So
Yes.
sometimes it can be a communication about the parents not each buying the same gift for the child because like you get the kind of favorite Christmas gift come up every now and again, don't you? That is like the
Mm,
kind of fashionable thing to buy and all the children want it. And if
mm,
there's no communication and each parent buys it, then that could be either odd or the child's thinking, why have I got two of them?
yeah. I've always with my own children, I've always taken the view that gifts that they are given, they become then the possession of the child. They're not mine anymore. They're not their dad's. They're possessions of the child, and they can take them where they want them to be.
Mm,
I do remind them that if they want them back here again, they need to remember to bring them home again. And, I might ask when they were younger, I would have said to their dad, they're bringing whatever it is, the Nintendo Switch, can you make sure they bring it back? But ultimately, that gift belongs to that child. It doesn't belong to you anymore. And I see that kind of as giving a gift with strings attached.
mm. But it
Um,
does come up a lot, and
yes,
it's more of a practical consideration than a legal consideration.
yeah,
But again, um, entering into mediation, um, if there's solicitors involved, sometimes solicitors and mediators together with both parents can be a really good thing to do.
mm,
To try to deal with the emotional aspect of certain things.
yeah,
Um, and sometimes it might be that actually it would be advisable for one parent to enter some kind of therapeutic um, professional help
mm,
if they're concerned about how they're reacting to things.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Um, so there's one other thing that I want to talk about, which is blended families and how the impact of one parent having a new partner, perhaps there are other children who come into the mix and all of those kinds of things, because that can bring a whole load of other issues, can't it? You
Mm,
know, so if you're the parent in the blended family, there's a need to be perhaps aware of the feelings of the other parent. There might be children from two different families coming together for Christmas and different traditions, and all of that. And I think your point just now is really important. Children don't necessarily see it in the same way as we see it as adults. They see it through their own eyes. They might be seeing it as, oh, brilliant, there's going to be another couple of children around, whereas we might be looking at it from a totally different perspective. So I just wondered whether that ever comes up in your conversations. Do people ever come back to you late,
yeah,
years later
yeah.
even?
Yeah, and sometimes it is it's really nice to then see people or they might come back with a question or something or if I see somebody like out in public that I helped with and I wait to see if they come and speak to me obviously for
Mm,
confidentiality's point of view but to hear things as to what's happened and how things have developed and I think we've talked about it before about not reacting to things taking your time to look at how things are occurring and to realize that everybody's adjusting.
mm, yeah,
And an example of something as well that um, has happened in my own private life, but also I do hear clients talk about it as well, is that they might say, "Oh, well, why can't we all go to the light switch on together?"
yes,
Because they might have seen a conflict between the parents at a certain time, but their children's concept of time is different to ours. And
and
actually,
their
what,
concept of relationships as well.
yeah, and what
Yeah,
a parent may have put significance on, actually, the child may not have ever thought about again. So again,
mm,
it's we talk about making assumptions about adults, but also making not making assumptions about what your children might be thinking.
yes,
And we've talked before about being flexible about things. And again, I think that even in your own perhaps new blended family unit, you may have to be flexible yourself.
yes. The
Um,
scheduling can be a lot more complicated, for example, and without a
mm,
bit of flexibility, because you might have, there might be other sets of people from this other family that have joined yours to be thinking about as well. So flexibility is going to be really key. And I always think the other thing I always think is it can be difficult as the parent who perhaps is on their own this Christmas to be thinking of your children, spending time with your partner, but not only your partner, their new partner and their children as well. That can be very difficult to do. Um, and to just acknowledge that is difficult to do. Really acknowledge it to yourself. Yes, that is really hard. But then to perhaps listen to the children and to the important thing I always thought was if the children are being treated kindly, if they are happy going, then that's brilliant. And
Mm,
not to worry anymore. You're always going to be their mum or their
yeah.
dad. And this other person isn't going to replace you.
And I
Um
think again, it's out of the context of what we're talking about today. But when we've talked before about the things you can control and the things you can't control,
yes.
there may be things that the other parent can never accept, and that you'll never be able to see eye to eye about certain things. And the reality is then you have to navigate that as best you can, because
Mm.
you'll never be able to force that person to see the way you see.
No, and if you keep trying, you're
Um,
just going to end up very frustrated and very angry. So I talk with clients a lot actually about radical acceptance. And you can Google this because it's a thing. So radical acceptance is when you accept that the other person is going to do things that you don't, this thing that you don't like, or that they have this character trait that you don't like and you find very difficult. But rather than keeping on fighting it, you accept that it's there and you work around it.
yeah,
And sometimes that's
absolutely.
all you can do.
And a lot of the time with, especially when there is children matters in court, because there might be arguments about the time they're spending with another parent, or if somebody wants to relocate, for instance, that's further than a normal commutable distance, if I could put it like that, then you have got legal issues to navigate, but also you do have a lot of practical issues to navigate, and it's things that the court can't necessarily deal with.
Mm.
So that's where the solicitors can assist with helping our clients to do that. And um, resolution, which actually I don't think we probably mention it enough, really, is it used to be the Family Law Association, and resolution is a code of practice of solicitors to assist people with dignity and respect, um, and to be as collaborative as possible. And actually, you can have a look on the resolution website and put in the postcode of where you are. So if the other person doesn't have a solicitor, you can encourage them to find a solicitor that is resolution um, signed up to resolution, if I can put it like that.
Mm.
But also, I'm a collaborative lawyer. And again, you can, which is extra training to be able to assist people with negotiating outside of court. And again, you can have a look and see all the solicitors in the area that are collaboratively trained as well. So that can be a really helpful thing to be able to work together to try to overcome issues.
Yes, and then this is something that I work with clients on a lot. How do I communicate this to my ex-partner, and how do I then respond? And you're talking about resolution, but resolution also have a wider membership. So
Yes,
people like me, we can also be members of resolution. I'm an associate member,
yes.
um, and so actually there is help out there to help you communicate yourself and directly without needing to resort to um, court proceedings and so on. Um,
However, that said, and my preference of doing my job is to always be amicable and collaborative and try to resolve matters outside of court. Sometimes you need the court process, and we're not we're not here to talk about more extreme issues today, but sometimes that's the advice that we have to give people, that the court process is required for certain reasons, and you mustn't be afraid of that, as in we're here to help you if that needed to happen.
yeah, perhaps that's actually a topic we could talk about in a
Mm,
session next year. That's probably worth us doing. Um,
yes, yeah.
we're coming very much to the end now. I hope that we have covered a lot of the important things that are coming up for our listeners. We're very aware that what we've talked about today are relationships between ex-partners that perhaps might be tricky at times, but overall, there's a possibility of being amicable and there's a possibility of communication. We're very aware that that isn't always the case, and there are situations, of course, where there's perhaps domestic abuse or there's domestic violence. Um, and we wanted to, just at the end of this, to give a list of numbers because over Christmas the courts are closed, the solicitors' office are closed. I go off on annual leave, so there's a couple of weeks where there isn't really anybody available if something happens or something goes wrong. So we wanted to just share. I'm going to share them on the screen now. We wanted to share some numbers, some websites, and so on for anybody who finds themselves in a situation where they need to take action quickly. These are some of the numbers and the associations that you can contact. So I will leave that up there at
And of course,
the moment.
if you can always we've got the police obviously emergency number there as well, but
Mm.
there is also the do you know, I always have to make sure I say the police one and not the NHS one. You can ring the 111
Oh yeah, yes.
number.
Yes, so that you, and then that takes you to a local
Yeah, and you
emergency
can
force.
ask for assistance as
Mm,
opposed to it being an emergency. So I think that's just
mm,
that's a good thing to realize that if, for instance, in a harassing situation, somebody keeps turning up at your door or keeps ringing and things like that, then they can give you some advice as opposed to you having you wanting to report it as an emergency. So just
yeah,
something also to bear in mind.
yeah. I would say absolutely. If you feel unsafe, then 999
Yes,
is
absolutely.
the number
Yeah,
to call. Um,
absolutely.
just a little note on a couple of these. I've got the Women's Aid website up there, but Women's Aid have a huge number of resources on their website, and they have a live chat. And they also have a button that you can press to cover your track so that it doesn't appear in your search history if you're worried about that, which I think is really good. So yeah, just some resources for you if your situation is more extreme than those that we've been talking about today. And I'm just going to stop that share now. There we go. All that remains then really is for me to say thank you, Lauren. We've covered a huge amount today. I think
Mm,
Lauren and I are back again in January when we're going to be talking about getting to know yourself again. So new year, new start, we'll talk about getting to know yourself again and post-divorce, because I know that that can be challenging for a lot of people. In the meantime, we wish you all a very peaceful Christmas, and hope that your children have a fabulous Christmas. So thank you very
yeah.
much.
And yes, and my best wishes for the festive period as well. And despite the difficulties that there may be, I hope you can find joy in things.
Thank you.